We are now into our third session on the 5 operating conditions. Now I've taken this a little bit out of order from what Charles presented this morning, and that's on purpose because team and culture is such an essential part of the early stage startup. How many are over $1 million in revenue at this point? Awesome. That's fantastic. So you guys are probably already getting a good start on team and culture. That's what we're going to talk about today, is how to establish that. Because having the right team and the right culture is how you develop an organization that can endure the growth journey. And if you remember, Charles was talking about endurance and the overnight success that a scaled startup is. Usually it takes at least 12 years to get to 10 million in revenue. So you've got to have a team and a culture that can endure that long haul. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to be digging into some of the things. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Brad Feld from Techstars, but he talks about when he's going to invest in a business, he looks at 4 key criteria, right? You guys know this, right? Team. Oh, yeah. Team, and idea. So that's what we're about today. The people side of your business truly is more important than product strategy or even funding. And so we're going to ask, do we have the right team and culture to endure the growth journey? So today I am joined by Larry Dolgin, Dan Holt, and Julie Dubin. Did I just say that wrong?
No, not at all.
Okay. Good. So I'm going to introduce Dan first in the middle. Dan is the founder and CEO of BillGO, which is a local technology company. He was an officer in the Air Force before, so he'll talk a lot from the perspective of how the military taught him to build team, which is going to be cool.
Okay.
And then he worked in Silicon Valley for quite a while at multiple startups. He founded a company called Height, which went through a couple of acquisitions that he led, and then it was sold to CSI. Then in 2015, he founded BillGO, which is a bill payment system. It's already in use by over 8,000 banks and 30 million consumers. He's doing tens of millions in revenue and has over 100 employees just since 2015. So nice growth curve, man. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Julie Dubin co-founded the nonprofit No Barriers. Actually, you co-founded and then merged with another nonprofit to create No Barriers. And that is an organization that helps veterans and educators and students and people with disabilities to overcome perceived barriers in their lives, find more purpose and ways to contribute the best that they can bring to things. And it's pretty cool. They did a big mountain climb a few months ago, where people of all different kinds of abilities, whether they were in wheelchairs or vision impaired or whatever, climbed a 6-mile climb, I believe it was, right? It was pretty impressive. So I'm going to volunteer next time you guys do that. That looks like fun. So No Barriers has grown to over 8 million in revenue, and well, revenue is a different term in a nonprofit, but it's quite an awesome organization. And Julie was responsible for team culture and HR. She just recently left No Barriers and is now running a family practice. So, and then Larry Dolgin, who was the president and founder of The Feet. The Feet was a courier company that did delivery and logistics, especially for medical testing and things like that. So when your doctor would take lab tests, they would be the ones that couriered that lab test over to the labs. He built that from a one-man operation in 1994 up to over 180 employees and 8 million of revenue. He had facilities in Denver, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, and Cheyenne, and had over 400 clients for delivery, courier services, and logistics. He sold that in 2016 and served as the VP of Corporate Development for the acquiring company, and then sold it again in 2018. And at that point, he retired from that business and is now a facilitator with Loco Think Tank, working with business owners and peer groups. Which, if you're not in a peer group, it's quite helpful to have a group of other business owners to help you think through your business. So talk to Larry afterward. Okay, so again, we're talking today about can your team endure the growth journey, and how that right team is essential to scale. Dan, I want to start with you. You told me something that I thought was really interesting when we first met, that you can have 4 average people and 4 smart people, and talk about that.
Sure. So one of the big things about culture that I've seen time and time again, you can get the most brilliant people in a room. A lot of companies say, no, we're just going to hire the smartest people. And that's great. And you can try to use that strategy, but I promise you, an average company or average team that gets together and works really well together, they'll always win. Long term, they always win. It's not the strategy, because the strategy is going to continuously change over time. And you have to realize that that's going to happen over the growth of your business. And so if you build the right culture, then you can endure the length of time and how you work together. So you can come up with a better strategy as a better team.
So how do you go about creating the right team? And I'm going to have all of you just chime in on that, but go ahead.
First and foremost, I don't hire jerks anymore, so I'm just done with that. So, there are a lot of amazing people out there. When we had somebody come in not too long ago, the resume is absolutely perfect. Everything was exactly what we were looking for. Every single question was answered perfectly. We went onto the deck, and we were showing him, Fort Collins, because he's from somewhere else. And he said, I could see how this would be impressive for somebody that's not from Colorado, but I'm from Boulder. And I said, wow, that was kind of a jerk statement.
Wow, and that's amazing. Wow.
And we have several people from Boulder, so nothing against them. My sister's from there and all that. But I just was, okay, I don't want to work with you. And so I'm too old for that crap. And so I look for people, first and foremost, people I want to work with.
Yeah.
I'm looking for thoughtful people. I'm looking for caring people. I'm looking for passionate people, people that want to make a difference in this world, because they can learn anything.
That's great. Julie, talk about it from the nonprofit side.
Yeah, and I would say building the right team has a lot to do with hiring the right people to begin with, but it also has to do with not being afraid to fire the people who are not fitting in. We talked about that in our last session. So it's, slow to hire, quick to fire, and I would just really reiterate that. And then I would say that building the right team is an ongoing process. So it doesn't stop with just hiring the right people who have that right cultural fit. It's really investing in those people and investing in the process ongoing. It never ends. You're always building the right team.
Just to add on to the firing when it's time to fire, we had a saying at our company. It was, the terminations will continue until morale improves. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. It kind of wasn't tongue-in-cheek. I mean, one bad apple, right? Terrible.
Truly.
And I kind of was lucky as far as building our team. I started the company when I was 25, and we kind of just all grew up together and grew together. My team lasted a good long time. So, but again, it was, earlier, I think it was this gentleman here asked a question about passion. And obviously, I wasn't passionate about making deliveries. There was nothing very exciting or passionate about making deliveries. It was the team that I became passionate about. And it was our organization, our success together that I grew passionate about. It really wasn't about, if I was doing what I'm passionate about, I'd be the worst fishing guide on earth, and I'd probably hate fishing now. So,
It's interesting you say that. I think we're hearing that with every group from Charles and every group since, that creating jobs that are meaningful, that pay well, that people can build a family on, that becomes far more important than making money and scaling. Scaling a business, it becomes the vehicle to build those families and those lives, right?
Totally.
Yep.
From our perspective in the nonprofit, a big part of what we were doing, or we do, is to serve our clients. And we're really focused a lot on how we're improving the lives of participants in our programs and how we are supporting them to live their best lives. And at one point, we had this light bulb go off that we really need to be focusing on the people in our on our teams as well. As much as we're focusing on the outward participants in our programs, we need to be investing in our staff to have those same growth experiences and investing in them in the same way.
Yeah. So talk about hiring for fit, culture fit, and how do you figure it out? I mean, it was convenient for him to complain about the Fort Collins view, but how do you figure out whether they're going to be a cultural fit?
To go first. So, go ahead.
But you guys were going to talk about some tests that you've done. We didn't do any testing.
So I'm happy to talk about testing, but I would say the caveat is we never used it during the hiring process. So we, after folks were hired, we would use a personality test, and it worked really, really well for us to build culture. I don't have any experience using a personality test, though, during the hiring process. So if we want to specifically talk about hiring, I don't think I should talk about the personality test. But I would say as far as goodness of fit, I think you design questions and design a process that allows you to get to know somebody. People can answer, like you said, can answer questions and sound exactly perfect on paper, but designing a process where you're starting to get to know how they might respond to situations that are real in your business or how they might interact with the rest of your staff is really the best way to get to know if they're going to be a good cultural fit.
Yeah, we do a little bit of testing, mostly for the sales team, to try to understand how they're going to perform. And then we haven't done at this company, I haven't gone through the personality test. We've done it at a previous company, and I thought it was really helpful. We'll probably go through it at this company. We kind of just grew really fast and weren't expecting some of this to happen. All good. But the other thing that we do is we take a ridiculous amount of time interviewing. It kind of sucks for people to interview at BillGO because you're probably going to have somewhere between 10 and 20 hours we're going to spend with you in some way, shape, or form. That's a lot of time.
Wow, just interviewing.
Just going through so we're interviewing on a regular basis. If you're an executive at BillGO, you're probably interviewing somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 8 hours a week. That's just what you do.
Big commitment.
It's just a big commitment. We want to make sure. The other thing we do a lot of backdoor references. So you can give us all the references you want, but we're going to find out who you are from some other people. I don't know if we're legally allowed to do that, but it works out pretty well. We do a lot with, I have recruiters go around and say, hey, I want to find other people inside of that organization that know, how it is to work with Mary or Joe, right?
LinkedIn is a lovely thing to try to
you
figure out
can tell.
those connections. Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Larry?
We didn't do a ton of screening prior to hire, but our orientations were, we'd go real deep into culture. We'd go real deep into what we were all about in the medical field, how it affects patients and the community. And, it's hard though, because it was also a very administratively heavy process. And, we had to do our best with our money because it wasn't a super high margin business, to say the least. I mean, second oldest business in the world is delivery business. We all know the first oldest. So it's been beat down over the years, but really it was our orientation process and 5 days of training, no matter what, which is far more than our competitors did. And in that process, really, we're paying for you to be there. If you weren't going to work out, it was going to come up, it was going to be obvious, and that was...
And they'd be out right away.
They'd be gone, yeah. Because the firings will continue.
Yeah.
We focus a lot on
Until
referrals,
morale.
too. Referrals help out a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to refer somebody that's a jerk, right? So you're typically going to refer somebody that you want to work with, that's going to perform well. If you're trying to make a big impact, you want the people around you that are going to make a big impact as well.
And I think one of the things that you have to think about also when you're hiring is making sure that that person gets to know your culture enough to help them actually exclude themselves because they're not going to fit your culture. I see a lot of companies that separate the hiring process from the organizational structure and have just specific people that are interviewing and things like that. And that's actually can be really counterproductive to helping them understand what the culture is.
And some of the best players in the industry, the vast majority of the best players in the industry, whatever industry you're in, they're not looking for a job. So it's usually the first thing if I talk to somebody and we're trying to recruit them in some way, well, I'm not looking for a job. Awesome, you're the perfect person I'm looking for. So I'm usually not looking for the person that's looking for a job.
Right.
To your point, there's a lot of PEOs out there. Does anybody here work for a PEO? Okay, so there's a lot of PEOs out there that will do your hiring and your orientations. And at least for us,
It's a really bad idea.
it was a terrible idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we tried it
Done
because
that.
it was really hard to find people. It's even harder now. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend that real highly.
Go ahead.
When we're throwing out some jargon, PEO.
A PEO is, why don't you define it?
It's an employee leasing company. Essentially, they co-employ them with you, right? So they're on your payroll, but they are
They're
your
like
payroll
Manpower
service.
kind of stuff, or-
Trinet, Administaff, ADP does it as well.
Yeah, it's so you get
You've heard of
all
that.
their benefits package. You're on their unemployment rate many times, which is why we used one, and they do your payroll for you.
Yeah. So let's talk about diversity in the teams and how you've seen that impact performance of the teams and the culture. I have found personally that diversity has a huge positive impact.
I could talk about that related, going back to testing. When I think about diversity, that brings up a lot of different ways of answering that question. And when I think about it with the teams that I have really worked with, the diversity comes in around how different people approach their work. So we've talked a little bit about these personality tests. It was extremely helpful to us to do a personality test across the organization so that people could learn a little bit about how they respond to change, how do they respond to feedback, how do they best orient themselves around new work, new challenges. So there was a lot of self-reflection that came up around that, but then also a better understanding of how to work with each other. And so having teams that were mixed, particularly in the startup phase when we were really growing, was very important to have a lot of staff who were excited about the creative process and excited about risk-taking and excited about change, but balanced with the folks who were very excited about systems orientation, analytics, and detail-oriented. And we had a lot of conflict actually between those two sets of personality types. And we eventually started to tease that out, that they're actually both important. Although we're growing and there's a lot of change, we don't want all of our staff to be in this camp. We need staff over here who can actually help us implement and create the actual long-term sustainable foundation to get us where we wanted to go. So when I think about diversity on teams, we did a lot of putting together teams that had those kind of diverse approaches and comfort levels.
Yeah, I think for our side, we're challenged in being in Fort Collins as well as being in tech. So the vast majority of our applicants are all white males, which is really, really tough when you're trying to get diversity across the board. So one of our founders, our CTO, is female. So we try to do whatever we can to try to bring in as many, but we're literally receiving 9-to-1. 9 male to 1 female, so it makes it really tough for us. But we're doing whatever we possibly can to say, no, I want you to take an extra look and do that with different race, gender, ethnic backgrounds, doing whatever we possibly can. Because you want the diversity of thought, you want people to be thinking about it from a different perspective. Otherwise, everybody's kind of thinking the exact, generally speaking, the same. So.
Yeah, we were kind of the same way. We were mostly male because that is the type of job that appeals. There's a lot of lifting. Got to be able to change a tire. Not that women can't change a tire, but that was something where with our interviews, we would bring people out to a car and be like, "Hey, this tire needs to be changed. Go," and we would just see if they even knew what to go find. But it's There was not a terribly diverse skill set that you needed to have, but there was a lot of different kinds of people that we needed to find a place for, if that makes sense. We had one fellow, Ron, who if Ron went to a new client, we'd get a call that some grizzly old angry guy is at their place of business. He was a rancher, man. That's just how he was. He was fantastic. We said, give him 3 days. If you don't like him, we'll replace him every time he changed. And he was with us for 9 years, I think. So, diversity of type of people, I guess.
So why does culture matter? we've talked a little bit about this when we were doing our prep and talking about things like how do you evaluate a culture and fix a broken culture. So just to kind of prepare you, let's talk first about why is it even important? Or is it?
Got to have peace among the ranks. Everybody's got to be headed in the same direction. To me, that's what culture does for you. It speaks a certain way when there's more people to speak to than management is able.
For us, I always think of it, Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Just like what we talked about at the very beginning, we can have all the smartest people in the world come up with the best strategy in the world, but if we don't work well together, it doesn't matter. And every single time that somebody's gone back and tried to measure culture in some way, well, what's a great culture? So many of these people want to work at Google. What's great about it? Do they perform better? Do they attract better people? Do they retain better people? At the end of the day, those numbers, and the answer is always yes, yes, yes. And so if that's the case and you want to scale a business and you want to perform better, then you better have a great culture. And you got to build a culture of, it's no fear, it's transparent, you do what you say, and there's a bit of freedom in there.
Yeah, I think that culture is so essential to engaging your employees. I think that when you have a culture that is challenged or going through crisis, you have employees kind of retreat into themselves or just want to scatter. And I think that we experienced a crisis of culture as we grew, and I can tell you it was a very difficult time in our organization, and we reoriented and picked up the pieces and really focused on building positive culture. And I can't begin to tell you how important that was to being able to reach our goals.
Yeah, I think having had my own experiences with a negative culture, and this is where I want to go because I'd love your advice on how to fix this. We actually had a controller and a key developer. This was quite a long time ago, and we had a fax line that was also a data line that the developer was needing to use to test software against an exchange in New York, and the controller needed to fax some financial paperwork to our accountants, and they literally got into a fist fight over the fax line. I am not kidding you. That's a broken culture. Now, ultimately, we had to fire the developer, but I'd love to hear. Probably should have fired him faster. He was a real problem. But talk about, I've got all the stories to tell about how not to build a business. So, how do you fix a broken culture? That's one way to identify it, but I'd recommend identifying you have a problem sooner.
It depends. It depends on why you're trying to fix it, right? If you're trying to fix your culture because your culture is terrible, putting up a nice saying on the wall isn't going to matter at all, right? If you're trying to put the message out there because you've built something that is positive and something people want to be part of, that's pretty easy, right? Maybe you grew to the point to where people don't know what the culture is just because they know you anymore, and so you have to have things like artifacts up to get behind it. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. But you can't just put up teamwork.
You can't paper over the culture problem.
So when we took over,
just see them fighting in front of the teamwork sign. That would be classic.
We took over a dock at DHL, so we were subcontractors running that dock. They treated us poorly. They were all union members, and they'd come in and the freight would be on these giant pallets that were built too high, and they cut them open and all the parcels would fall all over the place, and everybody's yelling and swearing and hollering, and it says on the wall, every package counts. That didn't work at all.
Gee, that sign didn't work.
No, it's unbelievable. So,
Dan, what have you done?
So first I'll say that every culture breaks on a regular basis. We have big breaks, we have small breaks, right? So,
no fist fights, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah, we don't have fist fights.
No fax line.
We don't exactly. We got rid of the fax line. We're good.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
So, fixing a broken culture starts at the top. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, every broken culture, there's probably something wrong with the executive team. I don't think you would ever say you go into a culture and say, wow, this is a bad culture. And the executive team's great. They work really well together, but everybody else is screwed up. No. So it's somehow typically going to start, especially a lot of us start businesses with other people. And I know I have. And you have to figure that out first. If you can't figure that out, then you're going to have a big problem down the road and it's going to come out. But we do break in some little way every day. Like, don't we have something? We're not perfect. We get it wrong. I sit there and we talk about the values of seek to understand and do what you say and all these other great things. But not every day do I seek to understand first. Sometimes I screw that up. I'm not perfect, right? So it gets broken and we have to check ourselves. So what I tell every new employee is you're carrying the torch. You're the one bringing it forward, not me. I can't do this every day. You have to do it. And if I do it wrong, you got to call me out on it. And then you're really transparent, really open about it. And you have to have that no fear zone inside of your organization. If you have that, then it's okay if it breaks. It's going to. But can you fix it? Can you make it better? Can you learn from it? Make that an opportunity? I believe you can.
I would say that culture is always evolving and changing. I agree with you. Culture is not static. You don't just arrive at a good culture and then you're hands off. It's something that needs to be managed and nurtured all the time. We had an organization that was kind of hovering at that $1 million mark for several years. We were at a plateau. We had 8 full-time staff. We had a fabulous culture. We all got along really well, didn't do a lot consciously to maintain the culture. Merged with another organization, had the anticipated growth that caused us to do the merger in the first place, but it was quick. We added staff, we added programs, we diversified. We really focused on the how and what we were doing, and we didn't focus at all on our culture, and that caused the breakdown. So it was a quick lesson in how important it is to focus on culture and not just on the how and what you're doing. And we fixed it by removing me from the other duties I was doing and having me really focus on HR and culture, so that we showed that we were valuing this part of our business as much as we were valuing the programs we were doing and the things we were selling and some of the other focus areas. We were focusing on culture. And then we were very transparent. It took us a while to get there and to really feel like it was okay to lay it out on the line. Like, we don't exactly know what we're doing here, and we're not exactly sure why there are so many challenges, but we're going to work together to figure it out. And it did work. The other thing we did is we asked for feedback. So I initially designed an anonymous survey. I love statistics and data. It was really fun. It took a lot of time to figure out that process. And we eventually found a company that was fantastic to work with called Culture Amp, and they do culture studies. They'll provide survey tools for you. And that was a much better way to do it. I wouldn't recommend doing what I did. And we asked for consistent feedback and then responded. We showed what the results of these surveys were. We were very transparent with the results, and then we were very transparent with how we were going to address the issues that came up from that anonymous feedback we got from our staff.
So I want to talk a little bit about building now a high performance culture and how to get that established. And I want to tell a story about a client of mine who was asking Dan's advice when I first met him about this. This is an interesting situation where the CEO is a bit intimidated by his sales team. He's got 4 younger women on his sales team, but he's not good at process and discipline. And so he doesn't have an established sales process with the organization. And so he's got these 4 women who all kind of talk amongst themselves, and they get into this groupthink mentality, and consequently nobody's hitting their goals and no one's holding them accountable to hitting those goals. And so we don't have a high performance culture there, and we're having trouble changing that culture. So talk about how you guys have gone about establishing processes to avoid groupthink, to allow confrontation and conflict when it's needed in order to let a performance culture foster from that? That's a really long question.
That was. Do you want to sharpen that a little bit?
How do you sharpen the team to get a high performance culture where they can actually work together and not be so conflict avoidant that they can't deal with issues that come up? I've seen, like in that case, that organization is so uncomfortable with conflict that they will avoid conflict to the sacrifice of performance.
So what we did for that is we had mantras, like if you have a problem, make it your boss's problem, right? Tell your boss, and then it's their problem. We actually had an open door policy that was written in our handbook, so we had a really an open door policy, and it was all about communication. If you're having trouble with a client or a coworker, communication is the key, and if it's a coworker of the same level, bring your superior in on it and work it out.
Okay.
So I'm going to stick with a little bit more about the high performance culture and how important that is. I always use sports as the best analogy for high performance teams. Everybody has to do their job. That's absolutely critical. We have to be a well-oiled machine. Some companies like to say we're a family. I don't like families because I think they have drama. I mean, I like my family, but I don't want to have drama inside of the, if we're going to be an Olympic team together and we're going to go win the gold medal, I want us to think about high performance and how we're going to do that. And what does it take for a high performance team to win the gold medal or win the Super Bowl or whatever it is, right? So everybody's got to do their job. You have to hold each other accountable. You have to be very transparent with where the problems are and where the opportunities are. We have to measure, we have to continuously improve, and we have to be absolutely relentless. And that's really how I think about it. We're just measuring it on a regular basis. We're communicating on a regular basis. Our entire company, we send out, every single executive has to send out an update to the entire company every single week with exactly what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. I don't care what it is, you got to send it out. And if it's bad numbers, it's bad numbers. What are you going to do about it, right? So trying to create that organization where you're not afraid of something being bad, you're just going to deal with it. If somebody can't, goalie can't stop a goal on a regular basis, you got to call it out. How are we going to fix it? So I think it takes a lot for a high performance team. I think the groupthink might be a little bit different. I think there's definitely something to it, without a doubt. Haven't experienced that as much. I think if we're super transparent and there's no fear, it's a no fear zone, then it's hard for anybody to be afraid or not speak up, So people are willing to do it.
I'll go back to the conflict question. So we created a safe space for conflict. So we recognized that there was conflict happening, groupthink, people were kind of pulling away from each other and getting mired into conflict. So we identified a tool that we would use organization-wide to help people have those difficult conversations. We trained everybody in that tool, and then we practiced. And we made people sit in a room with each other and go through the process with hypothetical confrontations where there wasn't any emotion involved, so that they could practice the technique and feel comfortable with having those conversations and understand that the expectation was that they would initiate those conversations if a conflict arose. We did always ask for a neutral party to observe those conversations, and we trained all of our staff on how to be that neutral, supportive observer. And that was fantastic. That worked really well, and it took the kind of scariness out of conflict. Obviously, if those conversations didn't allow for a resolution, then we would ask them to escalate it to a supervisor.
So we're running a little short on time. I'm going to take one last question from me and then let you guys take over. When we're in early stage, title management can be a really big deal. It's very easy to assign somebody VP of development and then realize that you're never going to get funded if that person is VP of development or whatever. Been there. So talk about how to handle title inflation after it's happened, and recommendations for avoiding it in the first place, because I'm sure there's some people here that have already got inflated titles on the books and they're going to have to deal with it, and some of us might be able to avoid this problem.
Yep. So I had a really good recommendation from a board director that we have. It's been a personal mentor, fantastic, run a bunch of businesses. And he said, start the conversation with one question. What matters more, your ego or your compensation? Because typically you're not going to reduce their compensation, right? You can try that. I'll promise you that's not going to go over so well.
Never works.
Yeah. So start with that first. And if it is ego, then that person probably is not a great culture fit anyway. And typically they're going to say, no, my compensation. Okay, so let's start with that. Another thing to do is start really early on. That I know that you are CTO, president, or whatever today for this company that's at $1 million today. But I also know, and I explain to them, I'm not going to be the CEO of HP. That's not who I am, right? So that's probably somebody else when this company gets to that level. So they have to understand that that's likely and it's going to happen. And I've had to do it multiple times. I just did it twice over the last 6 months because we grew so fast. And these two different people, they just weren't the right fit they were great for our company. We still kept them. But one lady's focusing on a certain area where she's really good. And another guy's focused on another area where he's really, he's great. But it doesn't make sense for both of them to run these entire organizations. And you have that hard conversation, and typically they're okay with it. It's hard. It's not a one conversation, I promise you that. I did both of those probably over a 3 to 6 month period. It's tough to do, but if you don't address it and just try to sweep it away, it's going to blow up. So you got to deal with it.
It's going to hurt your business.
And do whatever you can ahead of time to not just throw out those titles. They are very valuable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. But with that said, I said for years that titles don't matter.
They do.
Of course they don't matter. Why do they matter? I own the company. Who cares? I can call myself whatever is what I wanted to call myself. Titles matter to your employees. They do. So just be real careful about calling your bookkeeper the CFO because there's only 6 of you. It's a mistake. I made it. It was terrible. He ended up in a horrible situation and ended up looking like a fool because people in the room were like, oh, he's a bookkeeper. It's just not, that's no good. And I literally, this is a true story. Later on in the business, I had a partner he was partner of mine. He was also the president of the company. And we were arguing about one of the fellas in the business who should have been our director of ops. And he said, titles don't matter. And I said, I think they do. He said, I can tell you as president of this company, titles don't matter. God is my witness, he said that.
Did you have a comment on that, Julie?
No.
All right.
Great way to end
I'm
it.
sorry, but that really
That was awesome. It's a
awesome.
story. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned during the BillGO salesperson hiring process that you have to take some tests and specifically for that discipline that you're hiring. I know there's a lot of devil in the details, but high level, what does that look like? Is that something you developed in-house with a questionnaire, or is that some third-party tool?
No, it's a third-party tool, that DISC tool. I don't know if you've seen that one.
What is it called?
DISC.
DISC.
I didn't do it. It's
awesome.
yeah.
I just took it. I just took a disc test, and it was very, as compact disc. Thank you. It was very. Is you being serious?
No.
I mean,
Is it on?
DISC.
DISC.
DISC. I can't tell you what they all stand for, but it pegged me exactly for. It takes all 4 attributes. What your natural behaviors are and your adapted behaviors are in those 4 fields, and then puts you on a target. And from that, you shouldn't use this as the only way to tell if somebody can be a CFO or not, but it's a pretty good indicator. Plus, people lie on their resume. If you take nothing home today, take that home. The resumes, they're nonsense. But this tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the challenges, these resumes look flawless, and then when I get in there, it's just like, what did you do there?
Right.
You're lost in the shuffle.
Right.
Was it big enough where you were lost, and we're small enough that we see every ugly,
This person was a liar. That's
Look for title inflation. Yes, sir.
So I'd like to unpack that a little bit. You said you had to take the test as part of coming on board. How did you fold that into this person will fit in our culture or they won't fit in our culture? Or did you? Was it just you took the test and
They're looking for.
well different?
Yep. No. So, our first value is do what you say, right? More than anything else. So if your adaptive behavior is very different than your natural behavior, you're struggling. It's going to be sucking energy out of you, and you typically cannot do that for a long period of time in your life. We can all do it. So if you're an introvert, you can be an extrovert for certain situations, but you can't do it for your job all the time, right? It's just very difficult to do. So looking for that inside of it, and then the rest of it's really related to performance, to see trying to align, okay, how did that test come out compared to high performance salespeople? And that's really what our chief sales officer was doing. So
Did you find that you ended up with a homogenous set of successful people to build a successful culture, or was it more diverse? Like all our successful salespeople have this particular quality on this test, whereas all of our successful accountants had a different quality. Did that play a part?
there's a grouping, but I would say there's a bit of diversity inside of it. And that is true, though, that you'll see certain jobs are different. And sales is very different depending on what type of sales you're doing.
Would you say that the DISC test is more about skills or culture?
Gosh, it's both. It really is both.
Okay. When I took, I looked at it strictly from a skills set, but I just did it of myself, So.
And we used it more for culture. So
Did
that
you?
we also used the DISC test. That was the
And you
personality
used it
test
to
we
balance the team, right?
And we did, and we wanted balance
Yeah,
on the
gotta have
team,
that.
as opposed to homogenous silos of, all of our financial folks are this way and all of our sales folks are this way. We wanted diversity within the teams and felt that worked well.
Wow.
Another question? Yes, go ahead.
So you mentioned PEOs, but then I think you also mentioned you use some kind of outside hiring for companies. Did I catch that right?
I was saying that's one of the things that PEOs will do is they'll recruit for you and they'll go through the whole hiring process for you. But to me, that's not a good way to get a good fit on culture.
So
Doesn't
the
work.
question was going to be, what are the pieces of the interview process in your 20 hours?
Yeah,
You
well, that's-
absolutely would not outsource to someone else to do.
Okay.
If any.
Yeah, we still do, even if they're doing it. We're still going through the process. We still check the references on top of them. They'll give us the recruiters always say, all the references were great. I don't think anybody's come back and said, gosh, I'm really concerned about the references. So we still go through that process. But what the recruiter does really well is help filter down the 100 people down to 10. That part is really difficult for us to do, and we're not great at it. And we don't use recruiters all over the place. We use them here and there. We have to use them quite a bit for tech. We try to do whatever we possibly can for referrals.
So based on our public schooling, we have a tendency to have people are mistake averse. They'll hide their mistakes and make errors because you get the big red mark in the paper all through high school and college. What do you do to overcome that? 'Cause that gets really drilled in for, you're talking 12, sometimes 18, 20 years of constantly having that. What do you do to overcome for your no fear?
It doesn't stop.
Dan, repeat the question because I don't think the people in back heard it.
Summarize it.
Yeah. So what do you do if, our whole life we've been going through school and it's like, don't make mistakes, don't make mistakes, don't make mistakes. And then we go into corporate America and as you've seen, making mistakes, we do whatever we possibly can to cover our assets, right? So when you think about that, I think the first thing is you have to celebrate them. We did everything we could, but if we wouldn't have done this, we would have never known. And if Mary didn't try this, we would have never known. And you celebrate it. And it was interesting. I was just reading a book. It's called Work Rules. So if you want to, it was a great book about the culture of Google. And they actually give people bonuses for making mistakes. So that was really interesting for failed projects. And sometimes big failed projects. One of the stories, it was about Wave, which was this whole new, it was going to take over Outlook and Exchange, and that was going to be the new mail that everybody would use, and it was a complete cluster. They closed it down and everybody got a bonus. And they said, look, because they tried that hard, they worked that hard, and we want to reward that, and they were very creative in the way that they thought about it. It just didn't work in the market. So I think that's a way to do it.
I think another way is to be honest as a leader when you make a mistake, and be upfront and transparent about any mistakes that you're making, and lead by example.
Yeah, and talk about with the learnings. I mean, I think being open about it. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, you talked about how important communication and transparency is, to keep everybody rolling both in the right direction and so forth. Is there a line or is there a level where, at a C-suite level or so, that you need to kind of buffer the lower level to keep them from being concerned about, say, the financials going forward or so forth, that you kind of have to draw that line of communication?
So we do struggle with it. There's no doubt, but we've just erred on the side of, hey, we're going to let you know everything that's happening. We tell people our financials. Everybody in our company, they know. Yeah. It's tough to do because sometimes, but it actually helps you through the process, because if you have to explain that you had a down quarter or we made this major investment over these last few quarters, you should be explaining that anyway.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you should be explaining that purpose. And if they're that uncomfortable, I don't know if they belong, at least for us. It's just a little bit different. There are some things you cannot do that are absolute no-nos. Certain legal things you cannot do about, it could be a lawsuit or something of that nature. Acquisitions, that's a big no-no. You can't say that to everybody, especially if you're dealing with another public company. That'd be insider trading information. That's just absolute no-no. So there are a few things like that are no-nos. But for the most part, as it relates to financials, I recommend you share them. That's my 2 cents. I recommend you do talk about that. And the only other thing I could think of are certain personnel and health type issues. Those are no-nos as well.
I would encourage you to share financials and also provide some financial literacy training. That was something we realized. We were sharing financials, but a lot of our staff didn't really understand what they were looking at or didn't quite know how to interpret it. So there may have been things that they were seeing that were making them uncomfortable because they didn't understand what it was they were looking at. So just an added caveat.
It also, I think, helps get your back a little bit. Let's say that the company's not doing that well, and you got 4 people and their raise reviews, as they like to call them, are coming up. Hey, look, I'd love to give you a raise. You've had a great year, but financials don't support it right now. Really sorry, man. We'll talk, talk when.
When things turn around.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the end of this session. Thank you so much, you guys. This was
thank you.
fantastic.